The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop outside Wichita, Kansas, throwing Vale forward against the wooden bench, and she knew with absolute certainty that her borrowed dress had finally torn beyond any hope of mending. The year was 1878, and Catherine had been traveling for 3 weeks from St. Louis, each day bringing her further from the life she had known and deeper into territory that felt as foreign as the moon. The dress she wore belonged to a woman named Mrs. Henderson, a boarding house keeper who had taken pity on Catherine when she appeared at her door with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a letter from a lawyer explaining that her father's debts had consumed everything the family once owned. The shoes on her feet, cracked leather boots with holes worn through the soles, had been her mother's before consumption had taken her 2 years prior. Catherine had stuffed newspaper inside them to keep the dust and stones from cutting her feet, but the paper had long since disintegrated into powder. She stepped down from the stagecoach onto the main street of Wichita, gripping a small carpet bag that contained everything she now owned in the world: 2 threadbare chemises, a bent hairpin, her mother's wedding ring which she wore on a string around her neck because it was too large for her fingers, and the letter from Mr. Pemberton, the lawyer who had arranged for her to work as a seamstress for a Mrs. Adelaide Morton in this frontier town. The position came with room and board, which was the only reason Catherine had survived the past month at all. The Kansas sun beat down mercilessly, and Catherine raised a hand to shield her eyes. The street stretched before her in a haze of dust and heat, lined with wooden buildings that looked temporary, as if a strong wind might blow them over like dominoes. Men in dusty clothes moved along the boardwalks, and the smell of horses, manure, and something cooking mingled in the thick air. "You getting off or not, miss?" the driver called down impatiently. "I got a schedule to keep." "Yes, I am sorry," Catherine said, stepping fully onto the street. Her voice still carried the educated accent of her upbringing, though everything else about her suggested poverty. The driver tossed her carpetbag down, and she caught it against her chest, clutching it like a shield. The stagecoach pulled away in a cloud of dust, leaving Catherine standing alone in the middle of the street. She had the address for Mrs. Morton's establishment written on a scrap of paper, but before she could retrieve it from her bag, a commotion erupted from one of the buildings nearby. 2 men burst through the doors of what appeared to be a saloon, grappling with each other. One threw a punch that connected with a sickening crack, and several bystanders rushed to break up the fight. Catherine stepped backward quickly, her heart hammering, and collided directly into something solid and warm. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her before she could fall. "Easy there," a deep voice said behind her. Catherine spun around and found herself looking up into the face of a man who seemed to embody everything she had imagined about the West. He was tall, with broad shoulders and sun-darkened skin that spoke of countless hours outdoors. His hair was dark brown, almost black, and hung slightly long beneath a worn hat. His eyes, a striking pale blue that contrasted sharply with his tanned face, looked down at her with concern. He wore the clothes of a working cowboy: dusty trousers, a faded shirt, a vest, and a bandana tied loosely around his neck. A gun belt sat on his hips, though his hands remained on her shoulders rather than anywhere near the weapon. "Are you hurt?" he asked, and his voice carried a gentleness that surprised her. "No, I am quite all right, thank you," Catherine managed, suddenly aware of how she must look. The borrowed dress hung loosely on her frame for Mrs. Henderson had been a much larger woman, and Catherine had lost weight during the difficult months since her father's death. The fabric was faded calico, patched in several places, and now torn along one seam from the rough stagecoach ride. Her boots were visible beneath the hem, and she saw his eyes flicker down to them briefly before returning to her face. "You just arrive?" he asked, releasing her shoulders and taking a polite step back. "Yes, on the stagecoach. I am looking for Mrs. Adelaide Morton's establishment. I am to work there as a seamstress." Catherine fumbled with her carpet bag, trying to retrieve the paper with the address. "That would be the dress shop on Cedar Street," the man said. "About 3 blocks that way." He gestured down the street. "I am heading that direction myself. I would be happy to show you the way if you would like. It can be confusing for newcomers." Catherine hesitated. Everything about her upbringing told her not to accept assistance from strange men, but she was also practical enough to know that she was alone in an unfamiliar town with no idea where she was going. The man seemed respectable enough, and his offer appeared genuine rather than predatory. "That would be very kind, thank you," she said finally. He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that might have been courtly in another context. "Isaac Zimmerman, miss. Most folks call me Isaac or just Zim." "Catherine Vale," she replied. "Most people call me Catherine." They began walking down the street together, and Catherine noticed how people nodded respectfully at Isaac as they passed. Whatever his position in this town, he seemed to be well regarded. He adjusted his stride to accommodate her shorter legs, and when they reached a particularly rutted section of the street, he offered his arm so she could navigate it without turning an ankle in her broken shoes. "What brings you to Wichita, Miss Vale, if you do not mind my asking?" Isaac said as they walked. "It is not the most hospitable place for a lady on her own." Catherine considered how much to reveal. Pride warred with practicality, and practicality won, as it had so often recently. "Circumstances," she said simply. "My father passed away and there were debts. I needed employment, and Mrs. Morton was willing to offer me a position here." Isaac nodded, and something in his expression suggested he understood more than she had said. "Wichita has been growing these past few years," he said. "Cattle trade brings a lot of money through. It is rough sometimes, but there are good people here too. Mrs. Morton among them. You will be well treated in her establishment." "Are you a cattleman?" Catherine asked, grateful for the change of subject. "I work at the Riverside Ranch about 5 miles outside town. We run cattle, horses too. I come into Wichita most weeks for supplies and such." He paused, then added, "The ranch belongs to my father technically, though he has been ill lately. I manage most of the operations now." They turned onto Cedar Street, and Isaac pointed to a building halfway down the block. It was a neat structure with a painted sign that read Morton's Fine Dressmaking and Tailoring. The windows displayed several dresses on forms, all showing considerable skill in their construction. "That is the place," Isaac said. "Mrs. Morton is a fair woman, strict about her work but fair. She lost her husband about 5 years back and has been running the business herself since then." Catherine felt a wave of relief at seeing her destination, followed immediately by a surge of nervousness about the impression she would make arriving in such shabby condition. She clutched her carpet bag tighter and took a deep breath. "Thank you for your assistance, Mr. Zimmerman," she said formally. "I appreciate your kindness to a stranger." "It was my pleasure, Miss Vale," Isaac said, and there was something in his eyes as he looked at her that made Catherine's breath catch slightly. It was not the look men sometimes gave women they considered beneath them, nor was it pity. It was something else entirely, something that made her feel seen in a way she had not felt in a very long time. "I hope Wichita treats you well." He tipped his hat again and turned to continue down the street, leaving Catherine standing in front of the dress shop. She watched him walk away for a moment, noting the easy confidence in his stride, before gathering her courage and approaching the door. A bell chimed when she entered, and Catherine found herself in a room that smelled of fabric and lavender. Bolts of cloth lined the walls in neat rows, and several dresses in various states of completion hung from a rail along one side. A woman emerged from a back room, wiping her hands on an apron. She was perhaps 50, with graying hair pulled back in a severe bun and sharp eyes that immediately took in every detail of Catherine's appearance. "Yes," the woman said, her tone neither welcoming nor hostile, simply businesslike. "Mrs. Morton, I am Catherine Vale, Mr. Pemberton in St. Louis wrote to you about me." Recognition flashed across the woman's face. "Ah, yes, the seamstress position. You are here at last. I expected you yesterday." "The stagecoach was delayed by weather," Catherine explained. "I apologize for any inconvenience." Mrs. Morton waved a hand dismissively. "No matter, you are here now." She approached Catherine, circling her slowly, her examination frank and thorough. Catherine felt like a horse being evaluated at auction and had to resist the urge to fidget. "Mr. Pemberton said you had training. Where did you learn?" "My mother taught me," Catherine said. "She was very skilled with a needle. Before she married my father, she worked for a dressmaker in Philadelphia. She made all my clothes when I was growing up, and she taught me everything she knew." "Let me see your hands," Mrs. Morton said. Catherine set down her carpetbag and extended her hands. They were slender and pale, with long fingers. The fingertips showed the calluses of someone who spent considerable time sewing, and there were a few small scars from needle pricks. Mrs. Morton examined them carefully, then nodded with apparent satisfaction. "Good. Your hands tell the truth at least." She released Catherine's hands and stepped back. "The position includes room and board, as Mr. Pemberton explained. You will have a small room above the shop. In exchange, you will work 6 days a week, morning until evening, with Sundays free for church and rest. Your duties will include sewing, alterations, fittings when needed, and maintaining the shop. I pay $5 a week in addition to room and board. Does this suit you?" "Yes, madam," Catherine said, relief flooding through her. "That suits me very well. Then we understand each other." Mrs. Morton's expression softened slightly, the first hint of warmth entering her demeanor. "You look exhausted, child. When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning," Catherine admitted. "Come," Mrs. Morton said, gesturing toward the back room. "I will show you your quarters and get you some food. You can start work tomorrow when you are rested." The room above the shop was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, a small chest of drawers, and a window that looked out onto Cedar Street. After weeks of uncertainty and fear, it felt like a palace to Catherine. Mrs. Morton brought her bread, cheese, and cold meat along with a pot of tea, and Catherine ate slowly, trying not to seem too desperate despite her hunger. That night, lying in the unfamiliar bed and listening to the sounds of Wichita settling into darkness outside her window, Catherine thought about Isaac Zimmerman and the way he had looked at her. She had been looked at many ways in recent months, by creditors assessing her worth, by men who saw an unprotected woman as potential prey, by people who saw only her poverty and looked away in discomfort. But Isaac had looked at her face, met her eyes, and treated her with respect that had nothing to do with her clothes or circumstances. It was a small thing, perhaps, but it had mattered. She touched the string around her neck where her mother's ring hung beneath her worn nightgown. "I am going to be all right, Mama," she whispered into the darkness. "I am going to survive this." The next morning, Catherine woke early and dressed in the better of her 2 borrowed dresses. She examined the torn seam from yesterday and, finding her needle and thread in her carpetbag, quickly repaired it before heading downstairs to the shop. Mrs. Morton was already there, working on a complicated bodice that featured intricate beadwork. Good, you are prompt, Mrs. Morton said without looking up. There is porridge and coffee in the back room. Eat quickly and then I will show you what needs doing. Catherine learned quickly that Mrs. Morton ran her establishment with military precision. Every bolt of fabric had its place. Every order was tracked in a ledger with careful notes, and every stitch had to meet exacting standards. The work was demanding but not unreasonable, and Catherine found herself grateful for the structure and purpose it provided. Her mother had indeed trained her well, and by the end of the first week, Mrs. Morton was giving her increasingly complex projects. "You have a good eye," the older woman said one afternoon as Catherine finished hemming a dress for the mayor's wife. "Your mother taught you well. With practice, you could become quite skilled." The words warmed Catherine more than she would have expected. Praise had been scarce lately. It was during her second week in Wichita that Catherine saw Isaac Zimmerman again. She was standing at the shop window, pinning a new dress onto the display form, when she noticed him walking past on the opposite side of the street. He was leading a horse, speaking with another man who walked beside him. As if feeling her gaze, Isaac looked up and across the street. Their eyes met through the glass, and his face broke into a smile. He touched the brim of his hat in that now familiar gesture, and Catherine found herself smiling back before she quite realized she was doing it. Mrs. Morton appeared at her elbow. "Isaac Zimmerman is a good man," she said quietly. "His father, Jeremiah, owns one of the largest spreads around here. They are decent people, which is saying something in these parts." Catherine felt her cheeks warm. "He helped me find your shop when I first arrived." "Did he now?" Mrs. Morton's tone was knowing. "Well, that sounds like Isaac. He has always been one to help where he can." She paused, then added, "His mother died when he was young. He has been working that ranch since he was barely old enough to sit a horse. Now, with his father's illness, the whole burden falls on his shoulders." Over the following weeks, Catherine settled into a routine. She woke early, worked long hours in the shop, and spent her evenings in her small room either reading borrowed books or doing embroidery to improve her skills. Sundays she attended church, sitting in the back and mostly keeping to herself, though some of the other women were beginning to nod to her in recognition. It was on a Sunday in early October that Catherine's life in Wichita took a new turn. She had been there for nearly a month, and the Kansas autumn was beginning to show itself in the cooling temperatures and changing light. After church, she decided to take a walk before returning to her room. The afternoon was beautiful, with clear blue skies and a gentle breeze that carried the smell of distant prairie grass. She was walking along the edge of town, near where the buildings gave way to open land, when she heard the sound of horses approaching at speed. Catherine turned to see 3 riders coming fast, and one of the horses was clearly in distress, limping badly but being forced onward by its rider's spurs. Without thinking, Catherine stepped into the middle of the road and raised her hand. "Stop," she called out. "You are hurting that animal." The riders pulled up short, clearly surprised that anyone would dare challenge them. The man on the limping horse was large and rough-looking, with a week's worth of beard and clothes that suggested he had been on the trail for some time. His companions flanked him, both similarly rough in appearance. "Get out of the road, lady," the first man growled. "This is none of your concern." "That horse needs care not to be ridden harder," Catherine said, standing her ground despite the fear that made her heart race. "You are going to lame him permanently if you continue." "I said move," the man repeated, spurring his horse forward as if he intended to ride right through her. Catherine held her position for a heartbeat longer before survival instinct made her step aside, but not before she said clearly, "Any man who treats an animal that way is no man at all." The rider's face darkened with anger, and he began to rein his horse toward her, but one of his companions grabbed his arm. "Leave it, Jack. We need to keep moving." They rode off, and Catherine was left standing there, shaking with reaction to what she had just done. It had been foolish, she knew, potentially dangerous, but she could not have stood by and watched the animal suffer without at least trying to intervene. "That was either very brave or very foolish," a voice said behind her, and Catherine spun to find Isaac Zimmerman standing there, leading his own horse. He must have witnessed the entire encounter. Probably both. "I could not just let him hurt that horse," Catherine said, her voice not quite steady. "No, I do not suppose you could." Isaac's expression was serious as he approached her. "Those were Dalton's men. They work for a ranch north of here, if you can call what they do work. They are not the sort of people you want to challenge, Miss Vale, especially not alone on an empty road." "I did not think," Catherine admitted. "I just saw the horse limping and reacted." Isaac studied her for a long moment, and something shifted in his expression. "You like horses?" "I grew up around them," Catherine said. "My father kept several before we lost everything. I always loved them." "Would you like to meet mine?" Isaac asked, gesturing to the animal he was leading. "This is Ranger. He is about the calmest horse I have ever known, but he is good at his work." Catherine approached slowly, extending her hand for the horse to sniff. Ranger was a solid bay gelding with kind eyes and a white star on his forehead. He nuzzled her palm gently, and Catherine smiled, the tension from the confrontation beginning to ease. "He is beautiful," she said softly, stroking the horse's neck. "He is a good partner," Isaac said. "I have had him for 5 years now. He has never let me down." He paused, then added, "Miss Vale, would you allow me to walk with you back to town? I would feel better knowing you got back safely, especially after that encounter." "I would like that," Catherine said. "And please, you may call me Catherine if you wish. Miss Vale sounds so formal." "Then you should call me Isaac," he replied, and they began walking back toward Wichita together, Ranger following placidly behind them. As they walked, they talked. Isaac asked about St. Louis and her life before coming west, and Catherine found herself telling him more than she had intended about her father's business failures, her mother's death, and the slow dissolution of everything she had once taken for granted. In return, Isaac spoke about the ranch, about his father's illness, which turned out to be a weak heart that confined Jeremiah Zimmerman increasingly to the house, about the challenges of managing the operation and the men who worked there. "It is not what I expected my life to be," Isaac admitted as they reached the edge of Wichita proper. "When I was younger, I thought about seeing more of the country, maybe even going east to the cities. But then my mother died and my father needed me, and the ranch needed managing. Some things you do not choose, you just do them because they need doing." "I understand that better than you might think," Catherine said quietly. They had reached Mrs. Morton's shop, and Isaac stopped, turning to face her fully. The afternoon sun was behind him, casting his face partly in shadow, but his eyes were clear and direct. "Catherine, I would like to see you again if you would permit it. Perhaps I could call on you sometime when you are not working." Catherine felt something flutter in her chest, part hope and part fear. "I would like that," she said carefully. "But Isaac, I need to be honest with you. I have nothing to offer. No dowry, no prospects, nothing but debts and borrowed clothes. I am in no position to encourage a courtship." "I am not interested in your dowry," Isaac said simply. "I am interested in you. In the woman who stepped in front of 3 rough men to defend a horse she did not know. In the woman who traveled alone across half the country to start over in a place she had never seen. That takes a kind of courage that has nothing to do with money or clothes." He paused, then added softly, "When I look at you, I do not see borrowed clothes and broken shoes. I see a queen in humble disguise. Catherine felt tears prick her eyes at his words. No one had seen her that way in so long. "Then yes," she said, "you may call on me." Isaac's face lit up with a smile that transformed him from merely handsome to genuinely beautiful. "Sunday afternoon," he suggested. "We could take a ride out to the ranch if you would like. I think you would enjoy seeing it." "I would like that very much," Catherine said. Over the following weeks, Isaac became a regular presence in Catherine's life. He called on her every Sunday, and they spent the afternoons together, sometimes walking through Wichita, sometimes riding out to the ranch where Catherine met Isaac's father and saw the operation he managed. Jeremiah Zimmerman was a weathered man in his 50s, thin from illness but still sharp of mind and warm in his welcome to Catherine. "My son has spoken of you," Jeremiah said the first time they met, studying her with eyes that were the same pale blue as Isaac's. "He said you were uncommon." I see he was right. Catherine also met some of the ranch hands, including an older man named Pete, who had worked for the Zimmermans for 20 years, and clearly regarded Isaac as something between a boss and a son. "Never seen him so taken with anyone," Pete confided to Catherine one afternoon when Isaac was off dealing with a fence repair. "You are good for him, miss. He has been carrying the weight of this place alone for too long." As autumn deepened into winter, Catherine and Isaac's relationship deepened as well. They discovered they shared a love of reading, though books were precious and rare in Wichita. They talked about everything from politics to philosophy, and Catherine found in Isaac a mind that was as sharp as it was kind. He had been educated by his mother before her death, and by a circuit teacher who came through the territory periodically. And he had continued to educate himself through whatever books he could acquire. For his part, Isaac saw in Catherine a strength that humbled him. She worked long hours in the dress shop, never complaining, saving every penny she could spare. She was teaching herself bookkeeping from a borrowed manual because she thought it might help Mrs. Morton, and she had begun taking on extra piecework in the evenings to pay back the debts her father had left behind. "You do not have to do that," Isaac said one Sunday as they sat together on the porch of the ranch house, watching the sun set over the Kansas prairie. "Those debts died with your father. No one expects you to pay them." "I expect me to pay them," Catherine said firmly. "My father's name was once respectable. I intend to restore that, even if only in this small way." Isaac took her hand, noting how rough it had become from constant work, and raised it to his lips. "You are extraordinary," he said softly. It was in December, with the first real cold of winter settling over Kansas, that everything changed. Catherine had been in Wichita for 4 months, and she had saved almost $30 toward her father's debts. She was working in the shop one afternoon, focusing intently on a particularly delicate piece of lace work, when the door burst open and a young boy ran in, his face flushed with cold and urgency. "Miss Morton, Miss Vale," he gasped. "There has been an accident at the Zimmerman ranch." Isaac was thrown from his horse. "They have brought him to Doc Wilson's." Catherine did not remember dropping her sewing or running for her coat. She did not remember the route to the doctor's office, though she must have navigated it. Her first clear memory was of bursting through the door of the small building that served as Wichita's medical facility, and seeing Isaac laid out on an examination table, his face pale and his eyes closed. How bad? She demanded of the doctor, a tired-looking man named Wilson who had been tending Wichita's sick and injured for a decade. "Bad enough," Wilson said grimly. "He has a broken leg, possibly some cracked ribs, and he was unconscious when they brought him in. He came to briefly, but he is out again now." Catherine approached the table, looking down at Isaac's still form. Blood had dried on his temple from a gash above his eyebrow, and his breathing was shallow. Without thinking, she reached for his hand and gripped it tightly. "Isaac," she said firmly. "Isaac, you need to wake up now." His eyes fluttered, then opened slowly. It took him a moment to focus, but when he did, he found her face. "Catherine," he murmured, "you should not see me like this." "I am exactly where I need to be," she said, and realized it was completely true. Somewhere in the past 4 months, this man had become essential to her in a way that had nothing to do with survival or practicality, and everything to do with the heart. The doctor worked on setting Isaac's leg while Catherine held his hand and talked to him, distracting him from the considerable pain. When it was done, Wilson announced that Isaac would need to stay off the leg for at least 6 weeks, possibly longer, and would need help for some time after that. "The ranch," Isaac protested weakly. "My father cannot manage alone, and we have that contract with the Army to fulfill by spring." "The ranch can wait," Catherine said firmly. "You need to heal first." But over the following days, it became clear that the ranch could not simply wait. Jeremiah Zimmerman's heart condition had worsened with the stress of his son's accident, leaving him too weak to leave his bed. Pete and the other ranch hands were experienced and hardworking, but they needed direction, especially with the contract deadline looming. The situation was becoming desperate. Mrs. Morton came to Catherine one evening a week after Isaac's accident. "I know you have been spending your free time at the ranch, helping where you can," the older woman said without preamble. "I am going to tell you something that may seem unusual. I think you should go stay at the ranch until Isaac is recovered enough to manage again." Catherine stared at her employer in shock. "Mrs. Morton, I could not." "The impropriety, hang the impropriety," Mrs. Morton said bluntly. "That boy needs help, and so does his father. You are capable of providing it. I know you have been learning bookkeeping, and I know you can manage people and organize work. They need those skills right now more than I need another seamstress, good as you are. Besides," she added with a hint of warmth, "anyone with eyes can see that you and Isaac are courting seriously. If you are going to end up at that ranch anyway eventually, you might as well save it from collapse now." "I cannot ask you to hold my position," Catherine protested. "You are not asking, I am offering. Go to the ranch, help them through this crisis, and when things stabilize, we will see about what comes next. I am not without compassion, child, even if I do not show it often." So Catherine packed her few belongings and moved to the Zimmerman ranch. To preserve at least some propriety, she took a room in the small house where Pete lived, about 50 yards from the main house, and made sure to always have others present when she was with Isaac. But she threw herself into the work with the same determination she brought to everything else. She learned the ranch's account books and discovered they were in disarray, with orders and payments tracked haphazardly. She spent long evenings reorganizing everything, creating systems that would be easy to maintain. She learned the names of all the hands and what each man's responsibilities were. She rode out with Pete to check on the herd, learning to sit a horse again after years away from riding. She cooked meals for Isaac and his father, cleaned their house, and generally kept the operation running while Isaac recovered. Isaac, confined to his bed and then later to a chair, watched her with growing amazement. "You did not have to do any of this," he said one evening as Catherine sat with him, reviewing the account books. "Yes, I did," Catherine said simply. "You helped me when I first arrived in Wichita when I was lost and alone. Now you need help and I can provide it. That is what people who care about each other do." "I do care about you," Isaac said quietly. "More than care, if I am honest." Catherine set down the ledger and looked at him fully. "I love you," she said, the words coming out more bluntly than she had intended, but with complete sincerity. "I did not mean to fall in love, and I know my circumstances make me an unsuitable match, but there it is. I love you, Isaac Zimmerman, and that is why I am here." Isaac reached for her hand, pulling her closer. "Catherine Vale, you are the most suitable woman I have ever known. Your circumstances have nothing to do with who you are. You are brave and strong and capable and kind. You stood in front of horses to defend an animal in pain. You traveled across the country alone to build a new life. You work yourself to exhaustion to pay debts that are not yours. You came here to help me and my father when we needed it most, even though it cost you your position and your reputation. If that does not make you a queen, I do not know what would." He pulled her down until she was sitting on the edge of his chair, then kissed her gently. It was their first kiss, and it tasted of promise and hope, and a future that suddenly seemed possible. "Marry me," Isaac said when they finally broke apart. "I know the timing is not ideal, and I know we have not been courting long by conventional standards, but I cannot imagine my life without you in it now. Marry me, Catherine. Be my wife and my partner. Help me build this ranch into something we can be proud of together." Catherine felt tears streaming down her face, but they were tears of joy. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." They were married in February of 1879 in the small church in Wichita with most of the town in attendance. Catherine wore a dress she had made herself from fabric misses. Morton had given her as a wedding gift, the first new dress she had owned in over a year. Isaac stood beside her on crutches, still healing from his injuries but strong enough to speak his vows clearly and firmly. Jeremiah Zimmerman, though weak, insisted on attending, and he wept openly as his son married the woman who had saved their ranch, and in his opinion, his son's life. The wedding was simple but joyful, and afterward there was a celebration at the ranch with food and dancing and toasts that went on well into the evening. When it was finally over and the guests had departed, Isaac and Catherine stood together on the porch of what was now their home, looking out at the land that stretched away into darkness. "Are you happy?" Isaac asked, his arm around her waist. "I am happy," Catherine said, and meant it completely. The years that followed were not easy, but they were good. Isaac's leg healed slowly, leaving him with a slight limp that he barely noticed after a while. Jeremiah lived another 2 years, long enough to see the ranch prosper under Isaac and Catherine's joint management, and to meet his first grandchild, a sturdy boy they named James, who was born in the autumn of 1880. Catherine proved to have a gift for the business side of ranching, and under her management, the Zimmerman Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the region. She negotiated contracts, managed the books, and oversaw the household, while Isaac handled the day-to-day work of running cattle and horses. They were partners in every sense of the word, and their marriage became the kind other people pointed to as an example of what a union could be. Mrs. Morton remained a friend and mentor to Catherine, eventually teaching her the dress shop business so thoroughly that when Mrs. Morton decided to retire in 1885, Catherine was able to buy the establishment from her using money she and Isaac had saved together. Catherine hired 2 young women to run the shop while she continued to focus primarily on the ranch, but she enjoyed having the connection to her old trade and took pride in providing good employment for other women who needed it. The children came steadily over the years. After James came Sarah in 1882, then Thomas in 1884, and finally Elizabeth in 1887. Catherine loved them all fiercely and raised them to be strong and capable and kind. She told them stories about their grandfather Vale and the life she had lived before coming to Kansas. but she also made sure they understood that circumstances do not define character, and that true nobility has nothing to do with money or status. Isaac became a leader in the growing community, serving on the town council and helping to establish the first real school in Wichita. He never forgot what it was like to see Catherine standing in the street in borrowed clothes and broken shoes, looking lost and alone, and he made it his business to help other newcomers find their footing in the territory. The Zimmerman Ranch became known as a place where someone down on their luck could get a fair chance, and over the years, they employed dozens of young men and women who needed work and opportunity. Catherine never forgot her father's debts, and by 1883 she had paid back every penny that had been owed, though it took her 5 years of careful saving to do it. The day she made the final payment, she came home and wept in Isaac's arms, feeling as though a weight she had carried for years had finally been lifted. "Your father would be proud of you," Isaac said, holding her close. "I am proud of you." "I could not have done it without you," Catherine replied. "You gave me a chance when I had nothing. You saw something in me when I could barely see it in myself." "I saw what was always there," Isaac said simply. "A queen in humble disguise." As the years passed, and Wichita grew from a rough frontier town into a real city, the story of Isaac and Catherine Zimmerman became something of a legend in the area. People told their children about the cowboy who had seen past poverty and hardship to recognize the worth of a woman in borrowed clothes, and about the woman who had turned from penniless refugee into successful businesswoman and rancher through sheer determination and strength of character. But to Isaac and Catherine themselves, it was simply their life, lived day by day with love and partnership, and the satisfaction of building something meaningful together. On their 10th wedding anniversary, they stood together on the same porch where they had stood on their wedding night, watching the sun set over land that was now home to not only cattle and horses, but also their 4 children playing in the yard. "You ever regret it?" Catherine asked, leaning against Isaac's shoulder. Taking a chance on a stranger in broken shoes, Isaac pulled her close and kissed the top of her head. "Not for a single moment," he said. "You were the best thing that ever happened to me, Catherine Zimmerman. You still are." "And you saved my life," Catherine said softly. "In every way that matters." They stood in comfortable silence, watching their children and the land they had built together, and both felt the deep contentment that comes from a life well lived and a love well earned. The Zimmerman Ranch continued to prosper over the following decades. When James came of age in 1898, he took over much of the day-to-day operations, showing the same skill and dedication his parents had demonstrated. Sarah married a young lawyer and moved to Topeka, but she remained close to the family and visited often. Thomas showed an aptitude for horses that surpassed even his father's, and he established a horse breeding program that became renowned throughout Kansas and beyond. Elizabeth, the youngest, inherited her mother's business sense and eventually took over the dress shop, expanding it into one of the most successful establishments in Wichita. As they grew older, Isaac and Catherine gradually transitioned from actively running the ranch to serving as advisors to their children, but they remained actively engaged in the life of their community. They were the couple younger people came to for advice on marriage and business and life in general, and they were known for their wisdom, their fairness, and their genuine kindness. Catherine never lost her skill with a needle, and even in her later years, she could often be found in the evenings doing delicate embroidery work or mending clothes for her grandchildren. She kept, preserved in a trunk, the borrowed dress she had worn when she first arrived in Wichita and the broken shoes that had carried her through those difficult early days. Sometimes she would take them out and look at them, remembering the frightened young woman she had been and feeling grateful for the life she had built. Isaac, for his part, remained the same steady, kind man he had always been. His hair went gray and then white, and his limp became more pronounced with age, but his eyes remained that same striking pale blue, and when he looked at Catherine, they still held the same love and admiration they had held that first day when he had steadied her on the street in Wichita. In the summer of 1910, they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary surrounded by their children, their grandchildren, and what seemed like half the population of Wichita. It was a grand celebration, but at the end of the evening, Isaac and Catherine slipped away from the crowd and walked together out to the pasture where they could see the stars spread across the Kansas sky. "You remember that first day?" Catherine asked, her hand in Isaac's as they walked slowly across the grass. "When I stepped off the stagecoach and did not know where I was going, I remember thinking you looked lost," Isaac said. "And then I remember thinking you looked brave, being lost but standing there with your head up anyway." "I was terrified," Catherine admitted. "So was I," Isaac said. "Terrified that I would say something stupid and you would walk away and I would never see you again." Catherine laughed softly. "I am glad you found the courage to speak to me. I am glad you found the courage to come west in the first place," Isaac replied. "My life would have been so much emptier without you in it." They stood under the stars, two people who had found each other in unlikely circumstances and built a life together that had exceeded anything either of them had imagined when they were young. The ranch spread around them, solid and prosperous, a testament to their partnership and hard work. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of their family, the laughter and music of the celebration, the voices of children and grandchildren. "We did well, did we not?" Catherine said softly. "We did," Isaac agreed. "We built something good here, something that will last." They turned and walked back toward the house together, their hands still clasped, their steps matched by long practice. The celebration was winding down, but their children and grandchildren were still there, and they returned to join them, to be surrounded by the family and community they had created. As the years continued to pass, Isaac and Catherine remained the center of their family, the foundation on which 3 generations now rested. They were blessed to remain healthy and active well into their 70s, and they were blessed even more to remain deeply in love with each other. The passion of their youth transformed into something deeper and more enduring. When Isaac finally passed in the winter of 1922, just short of his 75th birthday, Catherine was holding his hand. His last words were her name, spoken with the same love and reverence he had always shown her. She wept for him, mourned him deeply, but she did not fall apart. She had learned long ago that she was strong enough to survive anything, and though she missed him with an ache that never fully went away, she continued to live fully, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, remaining active in the ranch and the dress shop until her own health began to fail. Catherine lived another 5 years after Isaac's death, and when she finally followed him in the spring of 1927, it was peacefully in her sleep, in the same bed where all 4 of her children had been born. She was 72 years old and had lived to see her grandchildren grow up and begin families of their own. At her funeral, the church in Wichita was packed to overflowing with people whose lives she and Isaac had touched over nearly 50 years. James, now a man in his mid-40s running one of the most successful ranches in Kansas, delivered the eulogy. He spoke of his mother's courage, her determination, her kindness, and her strength. He spoke of how she had arrived in Wichita with nothing but borrowed clothes and broken shoes, and how she had built a life that inspired everyone who knew her. My father used to say that when he first saw my mother, he saw a queen in humble disguise, James said to the assembled crowd. He was right. She was royalty, not by birth but by character. She was noble not because of money or status, but because of who she was at her core. And she taught all of us that true worth has nothing to do with circumstances, and everything to do with how we face those circumstances with courage and grace. They buried Catherine next to Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, under a sky as wide and blue as the Kansas prairie itself. The headstone, paid for by their children but designed according to Catherine's own instructions, was simple. It bore their names, the dates of their births and deaths, and a single line that Isaac had spoken to her that first day and had repeated countless times over their years together. A queen in humble disguise. The Zimmerman Ranch continued to prosper under James's management and eventually passed to his children and his children's children. The dress shop that Catherine had bought from Mrs. Morton and that Elizabeth had expanded became a family business that lasted for 3 generations before finally closing in the 1960s, long after such establishments had become rarities in a changing world. But the legacy that Isaac and Catherine Zimmerman left behind was not really the ranch or the business, or even the considerable financial success they had achieved. Their real legacy was the example they had set, the proof that love can transcend circumstances, that character matters more than status, and that two people who truly see and value each other can build something that lasts far beyond their own lives. The story of the cowboy who saw a queen in humble disguise, and the woman in borrowed clothes and broken shoes who proved him right, became a family legend passed down through generations. Great-grandchildren who never met Isaac and Catherine grew up hearing about them, learning from their example, and trying to live up to the standard they had set. And sometimes, when members of the Zimmerman family gathered at the old ranch house, now preserved as a family heritage site, they would walk out to the cemetery on the hill and stand before the simple headstone. They would think about courage and love and partnership, about seeing the true worth in people regardless of their circumstances, and about building a life based on mutual respect and shared dreams. The Kansas wind would blow across the prairie grass, the same wind that had blown on that day in 1878 when Catherine Vale stepped off the stagecoach in her borrowed dress and broken shoes, lost and alone and frightened, but carrying inside her the seeds of everything she would become. The same wind that had blown on the day when a young cowboy named Isaac Zimmerman had looked at her and seen not her poverty but her strength, not her circumstances but her character, not her humble appearance but her regal soul. And in that wind, if you listened carefully, you could almost hear the echoes of a love story that had transformed 2 lives and touched countless others. A story that proved that the truest nobility comes not from what we wear or own, but from who we are and how we love. It was a story that began with borrowed clothes and broken shoes, with a cowboy's clear vision and a woman's determined heart. And it ended not with death but with legacy, not with separation but with reunion, not with an ending but with a continuation that would last as long as people told stories about love and courage and the power of seeing truly. The sun set over the Kansas prairie, as it had set thousands of times before, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold and deep purple. The ranch stretched out below, still operating, still prosperous, still bearing the mark of the man and woman who had built it together from dreams and determination, and a love that recognized no barriers. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when their earthly work is done, Isaac and Catherine Zimmerman were together still, their hands clasped as they had been in life, their love as strong and true as it had been on that February day in 1879, when they had spoken their vows before God and community. They had lived well, loved well, and left behind a legacy that would endure for generations to come. It was enough. It was more than enough. It was everything.